So I think a lot of us can breathe a lot easier today knowing that our boy Hunter is finally free, because we all know that the deep state was really after you and me, but Hunter was just standing in the way. So Hunter, thank you so much for your service, sir. I'm obviously just being facetious. But as you might have heard by now, yes, it is true. Biden did announce that he is giving his son, Hunter, a presidential pardon after saying he's definitely not going to do that. Now, a lot of people have thoughts about this, as you can imagine, but a lot of the people who are talking about this, I feel like they're really missing the mark. So I'm going to look at some reactions, and then I'm going to share my personal thoughts on the matter, because I want to leave you with some moral clarity after subjecting you to the brain rot that you're about to see. So on the subject of brain rot, let's talk about the Republican response first, because as you can guess, their takes speak to a lack of self-awareness and hypocrisy, and it's not surprising, right? So, of course, they denounced this decision from Joe Biden. In particular, Donald Trump posted on Truth Social, "Does the pardon given by Joe to Hunter include the J6 hostages who have now been in prison for years? Such an abuse and miscarriage of justice." No, because you already said that you'd pardon them when you take office, so why would he do something that you already said you're going to do? And look, it's not like Trump has any shame, but he's probably not specifically condemning Biden for pardoning a family member, even though that's particularly gross, since Trump did the exact same thing. He pardoned Charles Kushner, the father of his son-in-law, Jared Kushner. And of course, like all things Republican, anything that they do that Republicans say, well, Democrats did too, they always did it worse. So Trump didn't just pardon Charles Kushner, a criminal, he named him to be the ambassador to France. Not to mention, he also pardoned many of his associates, like George Papadopoulos, Steve Bannon, Mike Flynn, Paul Manafort, and others that I can't remember. He also pardoned Lil Wayne. So I guess that's a win or an L, depending on where you come from. But I mean, Republicans in particular, they should probably keep quiet about this, because they can't say anything after enthusiastically supporting and electing Donald Trump. But since they lack both self-control and self-awareness, of course, they're loudly condemning this, even though they look hypocritical. For example, conservative commentator Scott Jennings, who supports Donald Trump, let that sink in, he took issue with Biden, namely because he said he wasn't going to do this, and he did it anyway, so he's lying, and he calls them the biggest liars to ever hold this office. And I just want to remind you again that this is somebody who supports Donald Trump. A Donald Trump supporter is taking issue with the president lying. Just let that marinate for a moment or two. Yeah. Now there's Speaker Mike Johnson, who also took issue with this. He wrote on Twitter, "Trust in our justice system has been almost irreparably damaged by the Bidens and their use and abuse of it." Let's pause. Mike Johnson supports Donald Trump. He's an ally with power, and he supports Donald Trump, who was convicted of 34 felonies and is going to get away with it. Nothing, no self-awareness. There's no like shame mechanism that's kicking in his head. No, okay. There's another one, Meghan McCain, who says, quote, "No one is above the law except the president's Nepo baby," interesting word to use, is a hell of a parting message for Democrats. And this one I love so much, because let's ask ourselves, why exactly does anyone care about what Meghan McCain has to say? How did she become an author and a political commentator and a consultant, or whatever she is, and the co-host on The View? How did she get to where she is now? We know why. She knows why.
My father, my father, my father, my father, my father, my father, my father's my father, my father's my father, my father, my father. I mean, my father, 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 my father's my father, 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 my father's my father, 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 my father.
That goes on and on, but you get the point. If you got to where you are because of your dad, then you might want to sit this one out, Megan. But there's more. There's Dinesh D'Souza, who tweeted, "No one is above the law except my son, Hunter." Well, I guess that includes you too, Dinesh, because you were literally also pardoned by Donald Trump, as the community note points out. And what am I supposed to say? What am I supposed to say about this? They have No self-awareness whatsoever. And I could show you more Republican reactions, but I feel like it's pointless because you're not going to be surprised. We already know what they're going to say. It doesn't matter if they probably shouldn't say anything because they look hypocritical or stupid. They're as shamelessly hypocritical as they've ever been because we live in an era where nothing really matters. You could just say and do anything and then do the opposite, and that's just politics. But I do want to pivot to some takes that are less insane, albeit still wrong. Case in point, let's hear from Dave Portnoy of Barstool Sports.
I'll start by saying if I could do that for a loved one, a family member, I would probably do the same thing. I won't lie about it. I'd be like, yeah, I'm going to protect my own. No shit. If Trump gets elected and they're going to make Hunter Biden go to court and investigate him, all this, yeah, I'm going to protect him. But the Democrats, Biden, they didn't do that. They're like, no, what are we, crazy? Now, this is the point of this rant. And I've been saying it over and over and over. And why the Democrats got slaughtered in the election. Because they think they're morally superior to everybody else. So any Democrat, and lots of them, whenever you say this, it's like, what a fucking liar Biden and the Democrats are. Can you believe it? They always, yeah, Trump, Trump, Your brain is broken. Your brain is broken. You don't get it. Because here's the thing. What the Democrats have done for, 12 years, have taken this moral high ground that we're the righteous party, the truth, honesty, integrity, and Trump is a threat to democracy. He's Hitler and he's a Nazi and this and that. And then the Democrats, whether it's the primary or this, time and again, they're worse than anything Trump's ever done. So if you're like, it's not that. It's the lecturing. It's the Democrats, this engine, just lying straight to our face, pretending they're the moral, righteous authority, and thinking the American people are so stupid that we don't see through it.
Okay, don't rich-splain to me what the American people think when you're a multimillionaire who probably hasn't talked to a regular person in years. But in essence, what he's saying is that he's not necessarily against Biden pardoning Hunter. He just doesn't think that Democrats should pretend to be morally superior when they're as morally compromised as Republicans. In other words, he's not mad that he did it. He's mad at how he did it, which is kind of a weird argument to make. And it feels like he's doing mental gymnastics because you can tell he probably doesn't really care, but he's trying to find a reason to be against it. And he doesn't care because, this man supported Donald Trump. So how do you nitpick Biden for doing a fraction of the things that Trump did? If you're a Trump supporter, you really can't. So this, to me, feels like team sports. But to be fair, I do think that Democrats come off as overly smug and morally superior. But regardless of whatever the perception of Democrats is, it is a false equivalence to compare them to Donald Trump in any universe, period. Are most Democrats morally flawed? Yes. But the most corrupt sitting Democrat today pales in comparison to Donald Trump, the person you just voted for. And he would probably listen to me say this and say, oh, well, you have Trump derangement syndrome or some bullshit. But that's just objectively true. Trump was found liable for rape. He was convicted of 34 felonies, and he incited an insurrection and tried to overthrow the U.S. government. Name a single sitting Democrat today with that rap sheet, and then we can have a conversation about the moral equivalence between Democrats and Republicans. Look, I do believe that both parties are bad. I'm a leftist. I don't like that both parties support capitalism. I am an anti-capitalist, so I have my criticisms of both parties as well as the system. But both parties, even though I think they're both bad, they're not equally bad. I think it's a false equivalence to say Democrats and Republicans are equally bad. But here's why this argument is so ironic coming from a Republican like Dave Portnoy. For decades, it was his party, Republicans, who presented themselves as morally superior with the religious grandstanding and cancel culture and slut-shaming. But once Trump entered the scene, they threw all of that out the window for a racist rapist. And Democrats rightfully pointed out that this kind of degeneracy and buffoonery that Trump represents was exactly what they claimed to not like. It's what they said the Democrats were and supported. And in their attempt to draw this contrast between Trump and themselves, I agree that they got a little bit too high on their own supply, and they engaged in ineffectual politics that ultimately made them look weak and out of touch. I think that Michelle Obama's comments about when they go low, we go high, that represents everything wrong with the Democratic Party strategy today. I think you have to fight fire with fire and be tough. But let's not pretend like Republicans didn't popularize this brand of purity politics. In fact, they still do it today. Do you think that Mike Johnson, who monitors his son and his own porn activity with some app, do you think that he doesn't think he's better than everyone else, even though he's parading around with a fucking rapist? Come on. So in my mind, the self-righteous politics of some of today's Democrats might be insufferable, but consider it a taste of your own medicine, Dave. But I want to move on because Charlamagne the God made a similar point, and I think that he was closer to the truth than Dave Portnoy, but still wrong.
Hunter was singled out because he broke the law. That's number one. He was singled out because he had an illegal gun and tax evasion charges, not because he was the president's son. And I honestly don't care. I just want Democrats to stop acting like they are on this moral high ground politically when they have shown us they're not, whether it's skipping the primary process when Biden stepped down and things like Biden pardoning his son. Stop acting like y'all the pure party and Republicans aren't.
I think that both things can be true at the same time. Hunter Biden was singled out because Republicans were trying to manufacture a scandal there. But I mean, it doesn't really matter that he was singled out because there was evidence of wrongdoing. He was charged with the crime and subsequently convicted by a jury of his peers. And that wouldn't have happened even though he was singled out if he didn't do the thing he was accused of. I mean, being singled out is uncool, sure, but if he hadn't committed those crimes, it wouldn't have mattered that he was singled out. Hillary Clinton was singled out during the manufactured Benghazi scandal, but since there was no evidence of wrongdoing, well, it didn't really matter that she was singled out in the end. So I think that you can concede to the point that Hunter Biden was singled out, yes, but a lot of people are singled out. And unlike Hunter Biden, they don't have a dad who's president who can shield them from accountability. Black and brown people who are poor are singled out by the system that we have, but they don't have rich dads or president dads that can bail them out when they're singled out, right? So being singled out, to me, you can concede that point while still acknowledging that there is something that feels gross about Hunter Biden being able to get away with this, even though he was singled out. But the evidence that Charlamagne points to for Democrats being morally flawed, it feels like he's reaching because he says that they're as bad as Republicans for skipping the primary process. I mean, have Democrats acted immorally in political primaries? Yeah, I've talked about that extensively on this show. Go back to 2016, 2017 on this channel. Should Biden, though, have stepped down earlier so Democrats could have had a more robust primary? Yeah, obviously that should have happened, but that wasn't possible given the circumstances that we were in. You couldn't have held a robust primary when he stepped down at in June or July. The best thing that we could have gotten was a contested primary, but the DNC delegates would have made the decision, not us. So it kind of feels like he's just trying to find something to draw moral equivalence between Democrats and Republicans, but that is not a very good example. I do agree, though, that Democrats are morally flawed, as I've said before, but I don't think that the lack of a primary is the best example to demonstrate how morally flawed they are. I think that the genocide in Gaza that they're arming and funding is a much better example that speaks to their moral depravity. And that's why I have such a hard time getting worked up about this story in particular, because even though I do think it's wrong for Biden to pardon his own son, I think that him being a co-conspirator in a literal genocide is orders of magnitude worse. Orders of magnitude worse. So in my mind, everything else Biden does just kind of pales in comparison to that, even though this pardon does feel gross. But the ladies on The View, they chimed in with some responses as well that ranged from reasonable to just plain weird.
I grew up with an immediate family member who was in and out of jail for addiction-related offenses when I was growing up. And now, a decade later, clean, have their life together, serve their time, are still dealing with the consequences. Inability to vote at time, paying restitution, working to get your record expunged, not being able to be eligible for certain employment. Most Americans, if they face consequences for actions that they took, they're going to have to face them. And nobody powerful and politically connected is going to come sweep in and save them. And I think, this feeds the notion to a lot of this country that there's simply a different set of rules for folks in power. And when we sit here and we say a lot like, well, Donald Trump did X, Y, and Z, and how did he get elected? Because to a lot of this country, it just becomes noise. They think that if you commit crimes and somebody powerful and connected in D.C., right, left, center, Biden, Trump, you're going to be able to get away with it if you have someone on your side. And that's not how it is for everyday folks.
Less than, get this, 0.09% of people are indicted, prosecuted, charged and found guilty of lying on a gun form. The only reason that Hunter Biden was gone after and charged, indicted, and found guilty was because his name wasn't Joe Smith, it was Hunter Biden.
So, you know, I actually talked to Joe Biden about this. When he was on the show, I told him I hoped he pardoned Hunter.
I remember. You did, I remember.
I went to speak at the Biden Institute in Delaware like a month later, and we talked on the phone, and I told him I hoped he pardoned Hunter. I left him a handwritten note at his desk at the University of Delaware and told him I hoped he pardoned Hunter. And the reason I thought it was important is because I wanted him to hear from people who support him and respect him, which I do, that some of us, I'd say most of us, think it's okay for him to pardon Hunter because of what you just said, that so many of the people who committed this crime do not get prosecuted. Imagine the guilt that Joe Biden has to live with, thinking that his son, his only surviving son, is getting prosecuted because he is his son.
Now, that last part with Ana Navarro was just weird because I guess I'm struggling to understand why she's so invested in pardoning Hunter Biden to the point where she literally lobbied Biden himself, Joe Biden, multiple times to pardon his son. I mean, why? I don't get it. Do you have a crush on him? It's just such a weird cause to take up. If I had that access to the president that she had, I would not be bringing up issues that affect just one person. I would talk about other issues that affect lots of people, like healthcare. But I mean, you've got to understand that these people live in this elitist bubble. So maybe to her, the biggest issue in her life is Hunter Biden being unfairly targeted. I don't know. It's just very weird to me. Now, moving on, I think that Sunny Hostin is correct about Biden being singled out, Hunter Biden being singled out in particular, as I've said. But when she says that there's a low prosecution rate for people who lie on gun forms, I think that the takeaway shouldn't be that, oh, okay, well, if that's the case, give Hunter Biden a pass. The takeaway should be, okay, well, give everyone a pass if you're going to give Hunter Biden a pass. And to be fair, Sunny in that clip, you didn't see it, but she did echo the point that Alyssa Griffin made when she talked about how the system is unfair and it is a two-tier justice system. Sunny talked about how she knows people personally who've been locked up for marijuana. But in my mind, that's the problem, right? This two-tier justice system, you can't just throw up your hands and say, well, the system's unfair, so let's keep it that way. I mean, a lot of the people who were jailed in part because of Joe Biden's 1994 crime bill. So I think that the pardon would be easier for a lot of people to digest if Hunter Biden wasn't the only one pardoned. Like, if he was part of this group of pardons of other people who lied on gun forms or who had nonviolent drug offenses, then I think that it would make more sense that Hunter Biden just happened to coincidentally get pardoned. I mean, we'd see through it, but at least other people are getting free as a result. Now, to Biden's credit, he has pardoned thousands of people convicted with federal marijuana charges, which is the right thing to do. But I mean, take it a step further. Pardon anyone convicted of possessing and distributing other drugs as well, such as crack cocaine, something that your son engaged in. Why should everybody else's children be locked up for that when your kid gets a pass? You know what I mean? Like, things like that, I think, would make it better. Pardon Indigenous rights activist Leonard Peltier. Take it a step further, so that way Americans feel like you're not just giving your son special treatment, but you are. And, you know, in all honesty, I don't think that Americans believe in our justice system anymore. They shouldn't, because we do live in a two-tier justice system. We're all led to believe that justice is blind, but that's not the reality. I think that's naive. It's a platitude that we've never lived up to as a country. All crimes in this country are effectively decriminalized so long as you're wealthy. That's capitalism. Inequality isn't a bug. It's a feature of the system, right? Money and might makes everything. But there were some Democrats who did take issue with this pardon, in part on principle, which I respect, but in part due to the precedent that this sets, which I don't respect because I think that that's a naive take. For example, Colorado Governor Jared Polis tweeted, "Well, as a father, I certainly understand President Joe Biden's natural desire to help his son by pardoning him. I am disappointed that he put his family ahead of the country. This is a bad precedent that could be abused by later presidents and will sadly tarnish his reputation." Let me just pause for a moment to ask Polis, do you think that maybe there's anything else that might be more pressing and significant that might have been more damaging to his legacy and reputation? Think of anything? Nothing? No? Okay. Let's move on to John Bolton. He's an anti-Trump Republican who made a similar argument saying Biden is doing exactly the wrong thing by pardoning Hunter. This will now give Trump a license to pardon all of his supporters, including those from January 6th. But as Kyle Kulinski put it, lowest IQ take of all time is Biden pardoning Hunter opens the door for Trump to do bad pardons. Trump already pardoned 5 corrupt goons from his administration last time, and he 100% is going to do more this time, no matter what Biden does. What are you, 12? And I think that Kyle is exactly correct. That's what people need to get through their heads. Even legal experts on mainstream media don't seem to understand this. Case in point.
Does Biden, in this move here, give Donald Trump new cover for whatever pardon action he decides to take in the future?
To be sure, Kate, we're already seeing that. The first reaction from Donald Trump and his team essentially is, what an injustice. Now we get to do the same thing, which is sort of an interesting twist of logic there. But without question, I mean, look, there has long been a fair debate, fair on both sides, about whether Hunter Biden is being treated overly leniently or overly zealously because of his status as Joe Biden's son. I think there are points to both sides of that. But what I think is not disputable is that this is a historic act of political nepotism. This is the granting of a pardon by the president to his son. Joe Biden even says, if you really parse his statement, he acknowledges that a substantial part of this is because Hunter Biden is his son. And that will land Joe Biden on a historic list that he probably doesn't want to be a part of, along with Bill Clinton, who pardoned his half-brother Roger Clinton, along with Donald Trump, who pardoned Charles Kushner, who is the father of his own son-in-law, Jared Kushner. So I'm sure Joe Biden understands the historic implications of what he's done, and now he's earned his way onto that list.
I agree with the point about this being nepotism, but Trump doesn't need a justification or a reason to do what he was already planning to do. He didn't use a Democrat example as an excuse to pardon Charles Kushner. He just did it. So I think that these arguments about Joe Biden creating some sort of bad precedent and disrespecting the rule of law are horseshit, because we're way beyond that conversation at this point, at least when it comes to domestic law. Internationally, I think that there is a real argument to be made that Biden truly has destroyed international norms by letting Israel get away with war crimes, by trying to shield them internationally. He's using his power to protect Netanyahu and Yoav Gallant from an arrest after the ICC issued warrants. So Biden has destroyed international law more so than I think he's delegitimized domestic law with the Hunter Biden pardon. And so, having said that, Trump did the same thing. But I mean, it's hard to focus on Biden destroying the rule of law when all of this is taking place internationally and our country continues to pretend like it's not happening. But Trump did the same thing. He let the Saudi crown prince get away with dismembering a journalist, Jamal Khashoggi, and Saudi Arabia also starved Yemen with an illegal blockade. Trump shielded them from that. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that the trust in law already wasn't there to begin with. So these conversations and arguments about, oh, this is going to lead to X, it doesn't resonate with me because we're already there. I think that people don't get that the ship has sailed there with regard to the legitimacy of law. International law and the Constitution have both been brazenly disregarded by every president this century. So I don't think that Biden pardoning Hunter fundamentally changes that correct perception that we all have. It just reinforces it. But even though our institutions don't have any legitimacy, and it seems like nothing matters, still, I will say, I am against this move in principle. I don't think it's okay for Biden to pardon Hunter because I genuinely believe that no one should be above the law. Even though we don't live up to that, I'm not going to say, well, it's already bad, so might as well make it worse. I'm just not going to concede on that ground. I'm not going to suddenly be in favor of Biden pardoning his own son because Trump pardoned his own cronies and would do the same thing. I'm not going to stoop to that standard. I'm still going to have principles myself. Having said that, though, it does feel so weird to have this conversation about Joe Biden disrespecting the rule of law now when we've been seeing what's been taking place over the last year. That ship has sailed a long fucking time ago. Is it self-serving? Yes. Do I support it? No. But this conversation that's taking place now about the impact that this has on Biden's legacy feels so tone deaf, again, when you remember that this president is arming and funding a genocide in Gaza, which is against both international and domestic law. So, in conclusion, Biden did a self-serving thing, and I think it's wrong that elites get special treatment. I think we should take that stance and not be hypocritical like Republicans and think that cronyism is all of a sudden good when Democrats do it. Having said that, though, most of the people who are lambasting Biden for this either are naive, hypocritical, or don't have a leg to stand on when it comes to morality themselves.
You know the thing. You're getting nervous, man.